William, thank you so much for joining us today. You are actually a podcast listener who reached out, and I'm so grateful to have you as a listener. And you mentioned that you have, at some points during our exchange, that you have some experience with medical office. And I thought it would be a great idea to have you here talk about medical because we haven't really touched a ton on medical before. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on the show. Yeah, I reached out because I really do appreciate everything that you've done on the podcast. And like I've said, the practical nature of your advice is certainly appreciated. Um, I'm just a small business guy. I don't have tons of properties. Never done a syndication before. I seeded a small building many years ago and have slowly turned them over the course of many years to the point where with a bit of the help of my father who had some medical office, he kind of helped me get into medical office by removing some of those fears that I think a lot of owners have or a lot of entrepreneurs have about getting into a business. So if I could do anything today, it's to remove some of those fears about medical office.
Amazing. Can't wait. And you said that you've grown in the medical office. Did you grow by selling or just buying more?
Right. No,
Selling
it's
and
been
buying bigger?
yeah.
Or
So I have purchased. I started by doing small duplexes. I initially seeded some money to a friend who was a contractor who needed to buy a piece of land. He didn't have any money, and then with that with that little seed capital, I was able to get involved in a few duplexes. And I'm not afraid to talk about duplexes. I love duplexes because I think that's an easy way for small investors to get started. But that capital eventually led me to be able to buy land, develop or entitle, develop, sell, and then roll it eventually into medical office. I typically don't try to sell. I'm not a flipper in the common sense. I find that there's a lot of people who are looking to return that capital back to them. I typically try to withstand it and hold for long term. So when I say I grown in medical office, it took me many years to get there, but it's to buy and hold. I typically try to not to sell. I want to pay down the mortgage and eventually, yeah, I'd like to buy bigger buildings, but initially it's to buy and hold long term ownership.
so you've been refinancing the ones you have, cashing out and buying other properties. Is that correct?
Yes,
Awesome.
yeah, this tide in the last 10 years has been very good for us, right, with low interest rates. So I've been able to do some of that. I don't have luckily the debt to equity ratios are definitely in my side because I'm quite conservative in my investment approach. And especially now in these high interest rates environments, we're all going to feel it, right? With the insurance rising, you're in California, you probably have similar insurance issues going on in California. I'm guessing. Florida is on fire with the insurance right now, so our costs are escalating along with the interest rates. But the debt to equity is low. It's in my favor, so I've been able to buy and hold. And even though I typically don't pull a lot of money out, I don't try to maximize it, but I have done it over the last 5 to 10 years in order to buy these small buildings.
Okay, that's great. And there's nothing wrong with not doing syndications. That is a way of growing, and it's perfectly amazing. I would love to be able to do that. So it all depends on what your goals are and how much
It's
additional
probably my
stress you want.
age. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's probably my age. It seems I think I probably should be borrowing money in different forms, not just from a traditional bank. So no, you're absolutely right. There's nothing wrong with it. Absolutely.
So let's dive into medical office. Medical office is one of the few offices that has been very stable during COVID. And I have a friend that owns a huge office building and it's, I think, 98% occupied. It didn't have one dip during COVID. So it is very solid. But I would love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, no, the medical office buildings have performed really well. Initially, during that first few months of COVID, we were very nervous about the situation with the rents, and luckily, the doctors, especially these small format doctors, in the 1 to 5,000 square foot range, most of them continued to pay their rent. There was a few that asked for additional time, and the leasing, as long as you're in a good location, right? Location. That's still very valid here. If you're in a good location, generally speaking, the medical office has been excellent. You need to have good parking, and you need to have ideally close proximity to a hospital. And if you're, or a network of doctors love to be near each other. So we look out for new real estate opportunities, we typically look initially identify the hospital and we branch out from there. But as a result, that usually drives your traffic to come view open spaces. Obviously, if you're fronting a street or you're near a major intersection, that's in your advantage. But the actual vacancy rates have been near zero over the last 10 years, and they've continued to rise, the rates. It's suffering a little bit now with the interest rates, because I don't think, or inflation. I don't think the doctors truly understand inflation. So they're gonna. I don't think they truly.
They should just look at their grocery bill to understand it.
Yeah, no, and they don't. And a lot of these doctors are unsophisticated, so they don't truly know how to do that CPI calculation. Have you done on any of your commercial rents? Have you done the CPI escalations?
Yes, I have. However, CPI, I heard they removed housing and food items from it, so it's not real.
And we're suffering that now. Every time I use the table, those tables are built into my contracts. The name of the table, the type of table, where you get it. And it's, as a result, the interest rate looks lower than reality. So it is absolutely very difficult for as a landlord to raise the rent using those CPI. But the space itself remains leased, and we've been very happy with it. And that's why I thought it would be a great topic for the audience here. It's like, no, you know what? People should seriously consider medical office. It really is a way, or a conversion for an existing office building. You'll see a lot of buildings out there. They can, depending on the city and the zoning.
So how do you find your tenants? To just think about all the tenants that you've had before, and of course we can use leasing agents, but is there a different way that you have found your tenants?
First, it's the size of the space. Larger spaces tend to be more sophisticated tenants that want to have that, that tenant rep. Tenant reps inflate all my costs, so they're dangerous from a landlord perspective. As a matter of fact, I joke around that when I see a broker and I see a tenant rep, usually the deal is going to be very difficult. But the size of the space warrants or the sophistication of the tenant, because their build outs can be complicated, and the doctors don't really know what they want. So, and I'm going to say it's probably not their spouses. I won't say anything if you saw that. Their spouses tend to be the ones making some of these decisions.
Sure.
And very difficult when you have a very expensive lease combined with a sophisticated build out. And there's an education process that, so anyways, yes, I've done the leasing with reps, and I've done it with brokers. If the broker is a good broker, you won't have an issue, and I'll be happy to pay their fee. Anything less than 2,000 or 3,000 square feet, I'm advertising it in front of the building. I'm putting the word out with existing doctors. There's a small group of community folks that are, these doctors tend to have like a point person at their front desk, and they have like a few important business people. And if you put out seats to a few of the larger ones, before you know it, word will go out to all these doctors. And if they like your building, they bring those doctors with them.
Yeah.
Because if you're an orthopod, or you're a pediatrician, or you're one of these sophisticated cancer doctors, the ones very specific, focused on one type of cancer, they're looking for those physicians to be very close, so they'll spread word. But the larger leases, the ones that require hundreds of dollars per foot in additional capital, those tend to go to the reps or the brokers that can deal with that level of sophistication. I've done a few of those. I haven't done a lot. The largest lease is about 12 or 13,000 square feet of medical office, which is very expensive if you think about it, right? They're installing equipment. They have very specific requirements. So it's not small in a dollar sense. It's small in a square footage number, but the expense per foot is so high. I prefer to do it on my own. I prefer to just manage the doctor's expectations, draw it out. I hire from time to time somebody who can do CAD drawings, quickly lay out the medical offices for them. And as a landlord, if you go to the doctor's office, your primary and every time you walk in and you see the size of their waiting room, you see the size of their existing exam rooms, you will quickly know what doctor's looking for. And that really applies to almost all specialties. So pediatricians have specific requirements. Lung doctors typically have more separation. And anyways, this is after many years, right, of seeing the same office layout, just minor revisions. When the doctors see that, they get a level of comfort, they calm down, and they let you kind of lead the way in terms of design. Minor modifications usually not in the under 3,000 square foot. And then I'm able to kind of push the brokers out of the way and manage it myself without necessarily having to list it on LoopNet, which LoopNet works very well here, at least. I don't know, is LoopNet good in your area? I'm not even sure.
We have, LoopNet and Crexy, both.
Yeah, Crexy is, for some reason, I've tried many times, just it hasn't had enough traction, though I'm hoping it does, because the more the merrier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's an average more or less for TI, let's say for a small office and your largest office that you have given?
If the doctor is willing to sign a long lease and it's a reputable doctor, like a desirable doctor, in other words, there is virtually no limit that I would not put them in. I will draw the tenant. In other words, I'll start at 10. I'll start to drive them down to $20 to $30, but I'll go all the way up to 150 within reason. But if it's a reputable doctor that I know will draw his own clients and his own dog,
Sure.
it's worth it. You give him 5 to 10 year leases, typically no less than 3 years with no build out or near zero build out. The 5 to 10 years, I'm starting to spend money on the build out. And if it's the right doctor or the right specialty, there's really no limit to it. Within reason, of course. We can't break the budget. So you'll have odd, requests, special MRIs or special PET scanners, and those cost the building a lot of money, right? Not the machine. I'm only talking about the build out around the machine.
Sure.
I don't buy the machine, but the build out, right? The copper or the radiation field, that's very expensive. But those tenants don't leave. Once they've installed that equipment, it's like a car wash. Like you can't take the car wash easily, right? It's the same thing for a doctor. Once a practice installs a machine, 20 years, 10 to 15, 20 years.
Exactly.
And they're not willing to give up on their equipment.
Exactly. Hard to move later.
Which is the storage dynamic. I like storage as an investment. They won't move.
Yeah. Sometimes they will, but not as often. I mean, doctors not as often as storage, of course.
No, and I will ask those questions. How old is the equipment? If they're moving equipment from another location, I will ask that question. I need to know. And they're looking at me like, why do you need to know the machine? I go, because if you abandon that equipment, it will cost me money to move that equipment out.
Sure.
And that has happened. You stick an old X-ray machine or mammography machine that's bolted to the ground, and handyman, you can't hire a handyman to remove that. They all look at it and they run away.
Yeah.
And then, so anyways, you want high quality machines with high quality doctors, but typically the reason to do that is for the term of the lease and it becomes almost like a excellent tenant long term. Just
agree.
Amazing.
Is there anything that we should keep in mind with regards to medical office leases?
So one of the things I think a lot of smaller guys they're afraid of that lease, the like negotiating or structuring the lease. Don't be afraid of that. Typically, especially if you have a direct contact with a doctor, you won't really have an issue. You just come up with a form. You're going to find go to the area mark and see if anyone has the forms. So don't let that be a challenge. It's really just, and I think that's the number one reason people don't invest in medical office. I think they see it as something scary that they have to have these contracts. Not an issue. Let's face it, these doctors are unsophisticated, they're straightforward. The bigger your space, yes, the more complicated it can get. That's one thing. Number two, like you want to talk to your local jurisdiction before you buy a building to make sure the zoning is in place. Even if the building is built, they may not have the water or the certificates of use available. So you need to have those conversations with whoever the city or the county is, whoever is managing it. Before I buy a building, I'll actually go to the city and ask those questions. The front clerk doesn't have an answer. You typically have to pay a fee to get a zoning verification form, a nominal fee. It's worth it. Pay the fee, but do the homework of verifying the location can, almost like that speaker that you had that talked about the development cycle.
Mm-hmm.
You can put something under contract, but then you got to go do all your homework. Same thing. When you're buying something, you almost have to put in a contract and then go see if you can do a certificate of use change for a use change from an office use for that was using it as a CPA that is going to move as soon as you buy it. Can you turn it into a medical? You go to the zoning office and you have those conversations. There's usually an impact fee here locally. They'll charge you an impact fee, even though the building is not changed. They consider it an additional consumption, whether it's parking or water or whatever. They're always taxing us here, right? So they're finding that tax. So do your homework before it, but conversions and for existing space to medical, totally possible. Look out for parking. I mean, what's a typical parking ratio in commercial? 3 spaces for every 1,000 square feet?
Yeah, 3 to 4 if it's retail. I'm sorry,
Right.
1 to 4, 4. Yeah.
And in
4.
Yeah. medical, what are you guessing is a typical requirement in small medical office? In South Florida, it's different because we're a little tighter. We don't have the
Yeah.
space, right? We have the ocean
2?
and you'd think, right? But doctors don't want to go to places that don't have a lot of parking. That is their number one. That is probably the biggest single amenity. They don't even look at the bathroom. They don't look at this, but they do need to wash your hands. You need to have sinks, but the parking. So typically I look for anything above 4. And if it's not above 4, I will start like discounting the price in my head, like what the reality is. And if it
Right.
gets below 3, it's typically not a medical building because a pediatrician will bring the grandmother, right? When the baby's born, will bring the grandmother, the dad,
Yeah.
the grandfather. They all might show up in different cars. And the joke is when in the medical world, the pediatrician, 5 cars for one baby. That might happen. But the OBGYN is typically one, or even the lung doctor. I forgot the technical name of the lung doctor. They have a very fancy name. The lung doctor typically has 1 per patient. So it's a lower impact on your parking ratio. So if you have a doctor that only sees 2 to 3 patients an hour, generally speaking, that's going to be a calm tenancy from a parking perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So when you evaluate medical office buildings, don't be afraid of it. Just keep all these things in mind. And I can go on. I probably could talk to that wall back there and continue going for a while. So.
Well, then we must have you back for a second episode. Is there anything else that right at this moment you think that is important for our audience to know?
Well, what would keep you from investing in medical office?
Nothing.
Nothing, right?
No.
It's just more about the opportunity, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people don't drive around thinking about medical office because they see it as something the hospitals do. And hospitals do they like to control their doctors, but there's a good 20-30% of the doctors that are on their own. And when you see a decent building with even a smaller one with a couple different doors or tenants, so you make sure you hedge your risk with the income, right? Check the parking, check the distances between all the doctors, and typically your medical doctors are going to be paying 10 to 15, 20% more than office use. And it's not an office, like it's not office. So it's not the same thing. And people ask me, how are your office buildings going? They're great because generally speaking, I've been lucky, and the medical use has continued unabated. So, so I always encourage investors just like you to, no, we got to keep medical on the, and even it is expensive, but conversions are out there. A lot of office buildings are empty right now. There's nothing wrong with going to the city counter and asking for this. What's the process to change the CU from general office to medical office?
Hint, hint, everyone in office areas that are depleted right now, like San
Oh my gosh.
Francisco, LA. Yeah.
Exactly what whenever I hear all that negative about office, I go, no, opportunity.
Yeah.
Just like you, yeah, whenever the interest rates, like we're entering an era of opportunity.
Yeah.
And to me, all these empty office buildings is pure opportunity.
Exactly. Well, this has been very great, William. Thank you so much for coming over. I know it's your first podcast and you did great. How can our listeners get in touch with you?
Well, I'm on email. You're probably going to put my name on the podcast or on the YouTube. Just put my name. It's at Gmail. So just, I don't, I work for myself generally. So I don't really have a website or anything, but if anybody has any questions, I'm an open book. And since I don't mind talking, it'll be very easy to continue talking.
William, thank you so much for taking this on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me on, and thank you for doing such a great job with all this media. I'm super impressed with everything you've done. I'm
so happy to hear. Thank you so much.